Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back from town meeting break. Any of you are like me, you didn't get a huge break, but change of scenery maybe a little bit. Dan's not here. I don't know if he made it home from Puerto Rico or not. Yeah,
Wow.
yesterday he was flying in from Puerto Rico. So, he said, I hope to be sitting in my seat at 8:30. Well, that's come and gone. In any event, and then, he's here, he's in a meeting, so he'd let me know that he was going to be in a meeting. I want to before we have Michael Grady come up and walk us through the bill, I want to just give some context to the legislature's work on this topic over the last several years. I think the first PFAS bill that I remember is one that we did during COVID, and it was an interesting time to do a bill like that, as complicated as that was during COVID, and try to explain all the terms. And former Representative Whitman did a stellar job in presenting it on the virtual floor. And we also passed a PFAS bill last year. So, it's sort of like piece by piece, we're trying to sort of attack this baby here of very dangerous chemical that is, what they call a forever chemical, because it does not disperse or disintegrate either in the body or in the environment. And so our efforts here in the legislature have been to try to work upstream so that we don't put materials into landfills, and that we don't have for purchase in our state materials, a wide variety of materials now that contain PFAS, that are regular consumer materials. So that's been our history. Last year we asked for a report because there's several jurisdictions for PFAS. So the health department, which is why we had done work on PFAS bills a couple of different times, because of the public health issues. It's an environment issue. Chair Sheldon said to me, "It's like, you're going to take the PFAS bill?" She said, "I think I could get started on it." I said, "Go for it, because we are probably not going to have time to do it." So they did it in environment this year. Ag has some impact on this as well, and there's probably others in the building as well. But so the report was really supposed to delineate, how we could look at a more comprehensive process instead of this sort of like piecemeal, one step at a time. And for the purposes of this bill, we ended back up at one step at a time. So that's just to give you some background, because many folks here on the committee have not gone through that process in committee. And for folks who were here, you might be wondering why we didn't do it. And just to fill you in on the conversation that I had with Chair Sheldon earlier in the session. So, and we do not have Dr. Levine here in person, but we have a slide deck from Dr. Levine to speak to the public health aspects of the bill. And we are not taking possession of the bill. We're just doing, I don't know what people want to call it, a drive-through, a flyover. I don't know. So what we'll be doing is just doing a straw poll at the conclusion of the testimony today. So Michael, thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you to all. I realize this is earlier than a normal Tuesday, but it is crossover week and everybody wants their bills to get out. So that's why we're here at this time of day. We're going to do just a quick run around the room because this is first time I think Michael's been here this year, and folks around the room, you may have seen them in the building, but you might not know who they are. So I'm Teresa Wood. I'm from Waterbury, and I also serve Bolton Fuel Score in Huntington.
I am Ray Garofano. I serve Essex and Essex Junction.
I am Jubilee McGill. I represent Bridport, Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge.
That's pretty cool, Hartford.
My name is Zon Eastis, Guilford and Burnley.
Doug Bishop, I represent Colchester's Chittenden 20th Street.
Hi, Eric McGuire. Good morning. I represent Rutland City.
Good morning. Dan White. Representative Wilkett, Hyde Park, Johnson and Belvedere.
Puerto Rico.
Yeah, fresh from Puerto Rico.
And Donahue, North Shore.
And then we'll go all the way around the outside, Paul.
Paul Burns, I'm the executive director of EPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, which have worked on PFAS and other toxic issues.
I am Sue Ray, also with the. Jeepin, represent East Montclair, Middlesex. I'm on the Environment Committee and here to talk through with you a little bit of the process on the committee.
Hi, I'm Cameron Simpson, I'm a legislative intern.
Great.
I'm Evan Kern, I'm a 3L student at Vermont Law School, and I'm an intern with the Nebraska.
Great.
Very much committee assistant.
Great. The floor is yours. Mike, that'd be great.
Good morning. This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. As I have not been in here this session, I don't know if you want me to put anything on the screen or if you just plan to work off of.
I think it would be good to put it on the screen if you were okay with that.
Do you think I need,
I emailed you the Zoom link.
pardon?
I emailed you the Zoom.
Just now?
Yeah.
Okay. It's to navigate.
Just to make sure that we're all looking at the same thing.
Do. Okay. I need sharing. Okay. It's not showing up. Here we go. There we go. Thank you.
There we go.
Again, this is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council to provide some additional context to the chair's great summary of the history of PFAS regulation. The General Assembly has actually been regulating PFAS in some form since about 2016, 2017. But when it first started regulating PFAS, it was doing so in a reactionary manner to it being in water or being in drinking wells, Bennington being the prime example. When your committee started taking more jurisdiction over the issue, it was when the General Assembly had moved towards more of a proactive regulatory stance, as the chair had indicated, trying to keep certain products out of commerce, out of the waste stream, out of the landfill, et cetera. And you were doing that relatively piecemeal. Last year in Act 131, as part of that bill, you directed the Agency of Natural Resources, after consultation with the other relevant state agencies, to report back to you to basically identify a program to restrict and regulate the sale and distribution of all consumer products containing PFAS going into the future. Because what you've proposed and what has been either piecemeal over the years is either having it in the Department of Health or having it at the Attorney General's jurisdiction under consumer protection. But neither of those programs were regulatory in nature. And when I say regulatory in nature, it's like you have to seek permission to sell your product. You have to meet certain criteria in order to sell your product. There's an entity there with staff that have expertise over the issue, and there's a vigorous enforcement authority and vigorous enforcement staff. That's generally what I consider a regulatory program. And that's not really there at the Attorney General's office, even though they can do it. It's not really there at the Department of Health, even though they can do it. So ANR came back and they proposed a regulatory program, and they proposed a program that would at first keep that kind of piecemeal model of listing out the specific products that if they contain PFAS will be prohibited, but then including a future regulation, which was contingent on states with northeastern states of a population of 15 million or more adopting similar laws. And at that time, they would regulate any consumer product with PFAS. And so if you had anything that had PFAS in it, it would be prohibited, or you would have to show that was currently unavoidable. And currently unavoidable meant it basically served an environmental health or public safety function that couldn't be avoided, the use of which was necessary. But part of what ANR proposed as their program was a different definition of PFAS. So over the years, when you have regulated piecemeal or product by product, you have defined PFAS to effectively mean, and I'll just read it to you. A class of fluorinated organic chemicals containing at least one fully fluorinated carbon atom. So anything with one fully fluorinated carbon atom. ANR's proposal was narrower. And I can't even pronounce it, but it's based on TSCA, and it's for the purposes of any chemical substance or mixture containing a chemical substance that structurally contains at least one of the following three substructures. And then those are the three substructures that I don't know how to pronounce.
And for committee members, we have a copy of this in our reports and documents page of the report that was submitted.
Now, the agency proposed that because remember that they were going to have a program in the future where all consumer products and with any PFAS in it. And I think they had a level of high anxiety about how many products that would mean if you were going with the definition of one fully fluorinated carbon atom, because there are thousands of PFAS, maybe tens of thousands. And with that many chemicals, how many products would they have had to regulate? ANR is probably the best place to have a regulatory program. They have people with expertise over toxic substances. They've been regulating toxic substances for decades. They've got Matt Chapman, who's really plugged into PFAS regulation regionally and nationally. And they have vigorous enforcement authority. They have vigorous enforcement staff. They have their own enforcement attorneys, which the Department of Health and others don't have. And so it was probably the proper place, but I think they were scared of the scope of what that program would mean if you had that definition. So when the committee downstairs, House Environment, was clear that they wanted to have that definition that you have used traditionally, one fluorinated carbon atom, the agency came in and said, we can't do the regulatory program. We would propose that you continue to do it product by product and to not cite the regulatory program at the Agency of Natural Resources. So that's why you have what the House Environment is proposing in H238. It effectively amends Act 131 from last year, and that subchapter in Act 131 that dealt with PFAS and consumer products. I had to do some funky things though, because part of the Act 131 report was to add 3 new products to the list of consumer products. You might remember last year in Act 131, when you brand that product, you did it in its own specific section.
Yeah.
And you used up all the section. You don't get it.
Somebody did. I don't remember who was the drafter, but yeah, So I saw that it's been reorganized.
Like,
The product.
literally every section in that chapter is in use. And Jen Carby, who is kind of our supervisor of drafting, said, I would have had to have redesignated other subchapters and basically changed the numbering of like 40 different sections. Instead, I struck all the section by sections that was in Act 131 and put them in one section. And that freed up about 5 or 6 sections that I could work with. And that's why it looks like it does. They're not undoing your work. They're just presenting it.
So that was my first reaction until I continued reading.
Right,
So
and then it's like, no.
there it is.
But yeah, it was like, I need a side by side because all this is struck and all this is replaced, but how much has it changed?
Right, it really hasn't
It hasn't,
changed
right.
that much. There are 3 new products, cleaning products, dental floss, and fluorine treated containers. And then fluorine treated containers is dealt with a little bit differently. But outdoor apparel is dealt the same way that you wanted it to be last year in Act 131. And textiles, same. So it's not changing any of that. It is basically putting everything from 131 into this bill for just basically transparency and for that restructuring issue.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just sorry for you folks, but just for my, are the timelines from last year for those products the same or were there any?
Yes.
Okay.
And then with the new products, because last year you gave 2 years for those products.
Yep.
You give 2 years for the new products as well, just for consistency and expectation for the market or the industry. So with all that, and I'm sorry that took so long.
That's okay. Representative Chapin has a comment.
On the timeline, I left you from. I just wanted to mention that it's not in this draft. We are wanting to change the time on 2 items from your work last time due to significant testimony in our committee about the challenge for those industries to meet the 2026 timeline. And that is cookware and outdoor apparel.
Okay,
So
thank
we
you.
are planning to shift those to 2028. I think in order for our committee group to like respond to that testimony.
Thanks for your
Thank you.
patience.
So you are in the chapter that you enacted last year in Title IX, subchapter 12A, it's PFAS and consumer products. The definitions are largely the same. There is a new definition of cleaning product that is on page 2, line 10, that compound intended for routine cleaning, including general purpose cleaners, bathrooms, cleaners, bath cleaners, etc. It does not mean an antimicrobial pesticide. You probably have products in here that are antimicrobial pesticides. Some of them have cleaning purposes. If it's registered as an antimicrobial, it's going to be dealt with as a pesticide and not as a cleaning product. Dental floss is another new category. It's a string-like device made of cotton or other fibers intended to remove plaque and food particles from between the teeth and reduce tooth decay. And then fluorine treated container means a fluorinated treated plastic container. There is a new or an amendment to the term intentionally added. It's the addition of a chemical in a product that serves an intended function in both the manufacturing of the product or in the final product and results in the PFAS in the final product. So that contemplates that PFAS might be used in the manufacturing and is not in an actual product component, but it still winds up or is part of the final product.
We had actually a lot of discussion about this area last year about at the time, I don't what I'm recalling is that people couldn't we had testimony about it being used in the manufacturing process, but that it didn't necessarily come out in the final product. So like, I'm thinking of gears on machines and lubricating those and stuff like that. And so I mean, it is a change in how to think about it. Because we actually did have this discussion about whether or not we would phrase it something similar to what is here, and we opted not to.
So this is based on what A&R recommended in their Act 131 report about how to use the term intentionally added.
Okay.
But it includes that final phrase that it results in PFAS in the final product. Because the committee downstairs in House Environment had very similar discussions to what I expect you had last year about, oh, just because there might be PFAS in a lubricant in the manufacturing equipment, does that mean that it needs to be regulated? No, it has to be in the final product. And that second sentence is also very important. It must be known or reasonably ascertainable by the manufacturer, that addition of the PFAS. So if they are using it in their manufacturing process, its addition to the product must be known or reasonably ascertainable. And there's a definition of known or reasonably ascertainable that's added that I'll get to in a minute. One thing that was not in the A&R report and their recommended changes to this term is how to deal with PFAS that might be in the final product due to use of water as processing, rinsing, etc. Because there is PFAS in water in both public water systems and in private wells. And industrial wells are used in the state. They don't need to necessarily be permitted. They don't need to meet drinking water standards if they're not going to be used for drinking water. So this is to address that concern that because it's reasonably ascertainable that PFAS is in the water that you're using in your manufacturing, that PFAS shall not be considered intentionally added if the chemical is present in the product due to the use of water containing PFAS and the manufacturer took no action that resulted in the PFAS being present in the water. So the manufacturer can use that water, and if the PFAS is present in the product because of that, but if they are responsible for adding PFAS to the water, then that is an intentional addition.
Go ahead, Representative Reese.
Thank you. So we had some discussion around that, around lead in water last session in a different bill. Is this in line with that?
I do not know. I would have to check. This is the first time that I've been asked that question. So, thank you,
If they're the same language in between both.
So I'm trying to think about, sorry, I'm going to use your area.
Yeah.
Of makeup manufacturers who use water, it's part of their products, often the first thing listed, and they might not have added it, but this would enable those products to continue to be sold. Is that right?
Yes, because that would not be considered intentionally added if they were just using water from a public water system or water from a well, and it had PFAS in it.
And we don't address anywhere in the bill what to do about public water systems with PFAS, like, remediation, screening, like, essentially what we heard from the solid waste folks about what they're doing up north in Coventry to try to remove as much of that to contain as much of it as possible in their process of dealing with waste matter.
So A&R does have drinking water standards for some PFAS, and they're called maximum contaminant levels. So where you can have a certain amount of a chemical in the drinking water and it's suitable for drinking. Public water systems currently need to meet that standard but it's not for every PFAS because there are thousands of them.
Yeah.
But they are working regionally towards coming up with a drinking water standard for PFAS and for surface water standards. So if there are discharges from, say, your wastewater treatment plant where there's going to be PFAS in wastewater because there's PFAS in us. There will be standards for that, but they're trying to get to those regional level. Until the regional standards are adopted, there are standards, but they don't cover all fluorinated compounds.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Because this is something that's a little different than what we acted on last year. Okay, thank you.
Moving on, there's that definition on page 4 of known or reasonably ascertainable. It's all information in person's possession or control, plus the information that a reasonable person similarly situated might be expected to possess, control, or not. Definition of manufacturer is the same as what you enacted last year. Outdoor apparel is the same. Outdoor apparel for severe wet conditions, which you gave a different effective date to last year, that remains the same, and they have that same effective date underneath this draft. PFAS is that broad definition that's been used traditionally for regulation of consumer products. Regulated PFAS is that term that applies to textiles because initially you allow 100 parts per million of PFAS in textiles, and then you ratchet that down to 50 parts per million. That was in Act 131. It remains the same in this. Textile and textile articles. I broke those out into 2 definitions. They were kind of combined before. This is just to kind of, actually the definitions weren't combined, the regulation of them were combined, and I broke them out in 2 different terms. Last year, you regulated them as textiles and textile articles. I broke them out into their own categories when you prohibited them. And then you come to, as Representative Donahue noted, all the strikeout. It's striking out those individual sections prohibiting the individual consumer products with PFAS in them. And instead, there is a list. So a manufacturer shall not manufacture, sell, offer for sale, distribute for sale, or distribute for use in the state the following consumer products to which PFAS have been intentionally added in any amount. So you have the aftermarket stain and water resistant treatments, turf, cleaning products, cookware, dental floss, incontinency protection products, juvenile products, rugs and carpets, or ski wax. Then for textiles, because you use that different term, it's the regulated PFAS instead of the intentionally added PFAS. Manufacturer shall not manufacture, sell, offer for sale, distribute for sale, or distribute textiles or textile articles to which regulated PFAS have been intentionally added. And then all of those prohibitions shall not apply to the sale or offer for sale or distribution of used products. So then you have striking out of turf, but it's still in the list. Cookware, still in the list. Incontinency protection, still on the list. Juvenile products, still on the list. Rugs, carpets, ski wax, textiles, all still in the list. Then there's a new section for fluorine treated containers. Remember, there's 3 new products. Dental floss and cleaning products are in the list. Fluorine treated containers are dealt with in a separate section because you're doing different things with them. So first is very similar to what you were doing in the list. The manufacturer shall not sell, offer for sale, distribute a product listed under 1 through 9, those products that you just, that does not contain intentionally added PFAS, but that is sold, offered for sale, distributed for sale, or distributed in the state in a fluorine treated container. So let's talk about this. Your cleaning product doesn't contain PFAS. It doesn't contain intentionally added PFAS, but your container does. That product is prohibited because of the concern that PFAS will leach into that cleaning product over time and therefore introduce the PFAS into the environment. So the product is clean, the container is not, the product is prohibited. And then the second subsection, the prohibition under A shall not apply for use of a product that has been previously used by a consumer for the intended purpose of the product. So maybe one of these products in a fluorine treated container was introduced, sold prior to the effective date of this. It's a used product. You're not going to try to regulate that. And then beginning on January 1, 2030, the manufacturer shall not manufacture, sell, offer for sale, distribute, or distribute for use in the state a fluorine treated container or any consumer product in a fluorine treated container. So not only are you banning intentionally added fluorinated consumer products or a consumer product that's in a fluorine treated container, you are banning all fluorine treated containers. However, in sub D, you give the Attorney General by rule the ability to add additional fluorine treated containers or consumer products, but to also allow them if their use is currently unavoidable. And currently unavoidable means the use of PFAS is essential for health, safety, or the functioning of society, and for which an alternative is not reasonably available. I expect you had this discussion previously regarding firefighting equipment, et cetera, where it is currently unavoidable and it's necessary for the protection of health and safety. And so the Attorney General will have that ability in the future to determine that a fluorine treated container for the product is currently unavoidable.
We have a question here, Representative Donahue.
Yeah, the term functioning of society, I don't recall that being in any of our discussion previously. That seems like an incredibly broad loophole for interpretation.
I base this off of the main standard language in the main statute. I see your point, and I think it can be refined if you want it to be refined.
And like, what would not be included?
Right.
Right under the functioning of
Right, I mean, it seems
society.
very broad.
It gives a huge amount of discretion. Obviously, the Attorney General would be making that decision, but
Point taken, and I can communicate that to the Environment Committee.
Go ahead, did you have a question? Okay, Representative Chapin and then Representative Bishop.
I just want to share a little more context and some of the testimony we heard. We heard a fair amount. So when we thought about moving this to Title 10 into a fully regulatory system, which is what Maine has designed and one other state, and when we were considering setting a date for all consumer products, not just the list here, but all consumer products, this language came up as really important and relevant to sectors to be able to, instead of, in this case, the Attorney General setting a rule about and making it possible for this currently unavoidable use. But in a regulatory environment, what we heard is that that would be something you'd have to petition for or apply for, and explain why your product cannot be made without PFAS and why it is. They would be making the case to a regulatory entity to say, in our situation with this product, it is not avoidable and it is important to society. So please give us permission to use PFAS in this scenario. And so this language is out there in other states and does seem relevant as we expand things like all fluorine containers by 2030. We may do something different, but before 2030, I would just say we really see this as one step building on last year's step of the PFAS, understanding about PFAS, our search for alternatives for PFAS and manufacturing, and just the knowledge and the work is rapidly happening because of how dangerous these chemicals are, but how all of a sudden 10 years ago they were in like every product and everything in our room, like that. They're just so prevalent. And so I think as industry switches and finds alternatives, it's been important to include this language in the general sort of manufacturing associations to really consider anything that's more broad, like all consumer products or all consumers. You have something like this as a tool to be able to make exceptions. I think it is really broad and subjective, like you said, but I think ultimately the way it's used is more on a product by product piece making as opposed to what think would be the scenario if a bit
Well,
broader.
I appreciate what you're pointing out, that this is for the things that, that it's not till 2030 that it would be that broad. And if things changed in terms of what we thought was feasible, that there's lots of time to revise that, but keeping it for now so people aren't too panicked.
Yeah. Well, and-
not being able to seek, waiver.
The other thing, I think is important to note is that it doesn't say the Attorney General may allow the sale, offer for sale. It says by rule. So,
Right.
So there would be a process to consider somebody's case about, wanting to sell. And before we move to Representative Bishop, can I just ask, is the Attorney General okay with the responsibilities outlined here?
Yes. Okay, express things.
Thank you. Representative Bishop?
Just trying to seek some understanding of the products we're talking about. You talked about the product may be clean, but if it's in a container that includes PFAS, that's a no-go. What is a fluorine treated container? Are there any readily available examples of what that might include?
So the one I'm familiar with, because I work on pesticide products, which are not regulated by this bill. But to give you an example, when you go to the hardware store and you get the spray bottle that might have a pesticide in it, many of those until last year were fluorine treated containers. They have PFAS in them for the durability or flexibility of the container. And EPA ordered a company last year to eliminate PFAS in those containers. But there are other products out there that have similar structural containers that have PFAS in them.
Still not sure. I'm understanding the distinction between a product that contains PFAS, I've got a spray bottle of something that in the plastic bottle, it's got PFAS, as opposed to a process where they've created the bottle, it's basically done, and then it's dipped in something that includes PFAS, or?
No, I mean,
Maybe this is too in the weeds, but I'm
It's a
just
little
wondering
bit in the
how
weeds.
broad,
Yeah.
how broad that is going to.
I mean, if this is a way that I found it sort of easy to think about these kinds of products. So if you think about anything that is pretty smooth, and allows for the easy, dispensing of whatever is in the container, it most likely has PFAS in it. Paper plates, the waterproofing oil things, PFAS in that. That's an example right there.
probably has PFAS in the container. You're not regulating this underneath this bill because this is an antimicrobial pesticide. So, and they're. Whoa, I don't know.
But that container most likely has PFAS in it, even though the contents may not.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's an eye opener.
Yeah.
To understand that it's everywhere essentially. Yeah.
Didn't we hear pizza boxes had them in them?
Yep, pizza boxes.
Inhalers.
Inhalers. We didn't tackle dental floss last year, so I'm glad to see dental floss is on the list.
Right, it came up in discussion.
Yeah, it
and
did.
We weren't ready for adding it
Yeah.
yet, but
Yeah, so it's an eye opener to learn about the impact of these chemicals and what is trying to be done to limit exposure for future generations. I mean, we've all
it's
got.
too late for us.
It's too late for us, just letting you know, so. Any other questions before we move on? Okay,
So moving on page 11, this is existing authority. This is generally how the Attorney General implements its consumer products authority. It asks manufacturers for a certificate of compliance that they're complying with whatever the relevant law is. That is unchanged from Act 131. The violations, the how the Attorney General can seek damages or penalties is the same. And that is cross-referencing to 9 VSA 2453. 2453 is the Attorney General's main enforcement authority for consumer protection violations. As you might remember, it also includes a private right of action for individuals that are harmed. And so that is not changing. Then you come to things that are amendments that need to be made in order for consistency with Act 131. So remember, the definition of regulated PFAS for textiles and textile articles shifts from 100 to 50 parts per million. And then in the definition of apparel, the outdoor apparel for severe wet conditions is added in 2028. So those are still being made. It's just bringing everything together under this bill. Then in section 4, there's an A&R report on PFAS regulation in other states. As Representative Chapin noted, there are 2 other states that are implementing regulatory programs based on that definition of PFAS of 1 fully fluorinated carbon atom to address the agency and natural resources anxiety about running such a program, while also gathering information about whether such a program is feasible. A&R reports back to you in January of 2027 with a summary of those programs in other states that regulate products based on that broader definition. If they have implemented those programs, any obstacles or difficulties they may have faced, and a recommendation based on the review of those programs in other states, whether Vermont should establish a regulatory program for PFAS based on that broader definition. Can I move on?
Yeah, go ahead. I have a question when you get a little further down.
You in Act 131 asked for recommendations about how to regulate what are called complex durable goods and food. In the Act 131 report, A&R proposed that they report to you in 2033 for how to regulate complex durable goods. And those are goods that are composed of 100 or more manufactured components with an intended life of 5 or more years. And if you can imagine having to put together something with 100 or more components and trying to source where everything came from and whether or not it all has PFAS in it or not, that is what this report is about, and also about PFAS in food from the Secretary of Agriculture. You might ask why those dates are so far out, and that is because A&R said that's basically when other jurisdictions will be regulating these types of products, both complex durable goods and food. They said if you gave them an earlier date, they would probably report back to you that they don't have the information necessary to provide the report.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the date. One of the questions that I have is in this section in the definition of complex durable goods. So it would seem that definition would include automobiles, and we exclude automobiles earlier. And so is that an intentional policy shift?
This is just a report, right? So it is just to look at how other states are really doing those complex durable goods or viable.
It doesn't require us to do anything.
It doesn't require you to do anything.
Yeah, okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
a question. As you started the presentation, you provided some history, and it sounds like we were, as you described it, in a reactive mode at first. We've become more proactive with products, and that a shift to proactive, if I understood correctly, was intended to be timed somewhat with the actions of other states, particularly New England states. If that's correct understanding of what you said, this then calls for reports that seem to gather information about what other states are doing. So did we ultimately decide to act on our own, if you will, or is there some evidence that other states are regulating this and this is just to get a better handle on it? What's that relationship?
So in some respects, there is regional coordination, and it is for for regulation, as I mentioned earlier, standards such as drinking water or surface water or waste, where you're trying to implement things. So because water is transboundary, because groundwater can be contaminated by, transboundary emissions. And so they're trying to find standards that are regionally applicable. And EPA is also moving towards, or was moving towards, I don't know where they are right now, to uniform standards. With regard to consumer products, Maine adopted a very broad standard and then directed that rules be adopted to implement that standard. So the Maine program has been kind of flowing for a while, but it's not fully finished, completed. So Vermont has been regulating products with PFAS in it, not entirely consistent with other states, but there is a general move towards regulation of PFAS in consumer products. Maine, Massachusetts, New York,
New Hampshire.
Minnesota, New Hampshire.
New Hampshire was regulating baby goods and we didn't have that on our list. And so we were like, oh my gosh, we can't let New Hampshire best us on baby goods. And Washington, so we did last year and in previous iterations of PFAS bill, look at what other states were doing and made some decisions to add in some cases. And I won't say that everything in this bill is 100%, in other states, but we made particular efforts to look at other states to see what was been their experience. And we intentionally did not go to what Maine did because they were in fact sort of backtracking on that action.
They came out hard and fast and
Yeah.
said, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, some of the places where there are different dates, where from the get-go, we said, well, 2 years for this and so forth, was in part coordinating with that. Okay, they're doing it this year. It would be unrealistic for our market to try to say, well, we want you to do it faster for little Vermont, when New York isn't doing it until a year later and so forth. So we want those implementation dates for different kinds of products. That was where we really focused on some alignment.
Go ahead, Representative Chapin.
There's a really great chart online with all the dates and all the states and all the products. So I make sure that gets in your inbox. So we can
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ella. Okay, so we're pretty much at the end until we get to
Till you get to the repealing those provisions in Act 131 that are being brought into H 238, that prospective definition of outdoor apparel for severe wet conditions, the prospective definition of regulated PFAS for purposes of regulation of textiles and textile articles. And then I had to amend the effective dates of Act 131, specifically because it's all moving, those effective dates for PFAS and consumer products is moving into this bill. It's the same effective dates. It's just that everything's now for PFAS and consumer products in this bill, not back and forth between 131 and this bill.
all right. Anybody have any additional questions for Mr. O'Grady? Great, thank you very much. That was very helpful. Ella, you want to join us and talk a little bit about the process that your committee used and that would be wonderful.
Morning, everyone. Chapin, House Environment Committee. I think I've chimed in with a couple of things along the way, so I don't have a lot to add, but happy to answer questions. I think we took quite a bit of testimony, particularly from a few different industries, and I've really already chimed in about which ones and some of the concerns that they were sharing. And I think it was clear how we sort of responded to that, particularly in the intentionally added changes. We heard a lot from manufacturers about the importance of making some of those changes. We heard quite a bit from the cookware industry and the outdoor apparel and outdoor industry here in Vermont, that there's some concerns about some of the dates. So we've made a couple of adjustments to really make it possible for them to keep moving with the product, not end up with product on their shelves that they can't sell, but to identify deadlines. All the industries sort of said 18 to 24 months is a realistic timeframe for us to be able to make some of these changes and identify alternative chemicals and move through product and without a big hit to businesses. So those are sort of some of the background of why we made some of those specific changes. And otherwise, I'd just be happy to answer any other questions you have.
Thank you. And I appreciate that we didn't change the definition of PFAS. And while that might mean that we can't move to a more regulatory structure at this point in time, I think it's important to keep the definition that we had and not, narrow it significantly. So, folks, have any questions for Representative Chapin? Go ahead, Representative.
Mostly not a question. I just want to say that, we spent a huge amount of time, and obviously your committee did also, and it's really great to see such excellent flow between next step, but in keeping with really kind of getting it in terms of what we did and what we were trying to do. And this is consistent and moving forward. And I just think it's a great piece of work building. The only question, just to clarify, it sounds as if with some of the accommodations that you worked on, which we had also done in our bill to make it realistic for business, was the general sense of the manufacturers and so forth that this was then workable as it is now?
That's what we've heard either in testimony or inside conversations. And, I think that there are other states that are pushing on cookware a little faster than us. And that industry was sort of sharing the most concern about being able to make these changes. But we also heard very specifically in testimony that they are looking at alternatives and that those alternatives are coming online.
And those were our dates anyway.
Right.
They were still pushing back on. Yeah.
So, I guess I would just also add that I think, after hearing all the testimony we heard in our committee and, we're going to keep working on PFAS.
Right,
We're not going to not work on it until 2033.
Right.
We're going to probably be looking at this every year or two and just continuing to add products and think about how do we get at all consumer products and then how do we get at these complex goods that have, hundreds of components. So I think it's going to be an evolving process over time and trying to not be the one state with, less than 1 million people trying to drive market, but trying to keep up with other states. So I think I would just say, there's only 2 states that have really implemented a regulatory structure like we were considering with ANR, but that will probably change over time. And we want to just, make sure we're in line and protecting Vermonters the best we can while also ensuring industries can make the changes over time.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Representative Chapin?
Thank you for all your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It is actually nice to
Complicated,
see, like what Ann was
Progress.
saying, it's like,
Yeah.
kind of like building on our work and then, because I had a little bit of anxiety about giving it up to another committee. But, if any committee could handle it, I knew it was your committee. So I appreciate that.
It expands the number of people who are really knowledgeable about this.
Exactly. That's true also.
We are going to continue to work.
Yeah. And Lori, would you be willing to pull up Dr. Levine's PowerPoint on the screen? So we can just all look at that together. He was not able to be here today. But obviously public health is our main concern. And so they did share the slide presentation that was done downstairs in the House Committee on Environment. And I think they added one other slide to it. So Thanks, Lori. We can move to the next page. So these again are things that the commissioner would be testifying to. But you can see the health effects of PFAS on people. It does say endocrine effects because reproductive organs and things like that, hormone levels, it has a definite impact on that. And you can see all the different issues that these are all proven things. These are not like, somebody just decided to write them up on a PowerPoint slide. So these are all things that are backed up. We heard these similar things last year. Lori, next one, please. This is particularly important, I think, in looking at the effects on development of a fetus and how, Dan, you brought up the issue of lead, very similar, in terms of developmental impacts on young children and children in the works. Thank you, Lori. We've heard about this, so we don't really need to go through this, but this is if you wanted to see what the chemical makeup is of it, there you go. We've talked about this already, so we can move on. This is exactly what we've been talking about, preventing it from entering the environment to begin with. So the upstream prevention activities that we are aiming to do in the continuing iterations of this statute is really helpful. I recall the testimony we had from the landfill operator said, like, it's really expensive to try to take it out and to deal with it.
Yeah.
So, the more that you can do to prohibit it from getting to the landfill to begin with would be really helpful to them, which makes total sense. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there an understanding as to how much the ill effects come from what I'll call in the moment sort of direct contact? It's in a product or it's in a container to a product versus if it's in the environment forever, are we doomed? Or is there, or is that, or the ill health effects less frequent when they're in the environment? Still bad, but.
So I'm not a doctor, but it builds up in your system. So the water has it, groundwater has it, municipal water systems have it. The food that's grown in the ground, that we consume, the ground has it. The chemical is taken up into the food. The clothing we're wearing, but it is everywhere. It does have cumulative effects for the body, and so trying to reduce the exposure to it, that's what we're trying to do. And I think there's still many years ahead of us in connecting all of the dots of, this is directly caused by PFAS, but you saw the list of things that the commissioner put up.
So we're slowing the rate of buildup by taking out of the direct products.
Right.
There's not much we can do about the fact that it's
there already.
there already.
Yeah. Representative Eastis, and then.
So really basic question, is this a man-made chemical? I mean, they've all been produced by us making effects on things. Wow.
Yeah.
And there are 40,000 is what I heard when I was downstairs listening to one test.
There's thousands of them, yes.
Thousands of them. God,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
The other thing is that, kind of like what man does, or women, is to, I'm kind of almost as scared about the replacement products, to be honest.
Right, exactly.
Because, who knows,
That's what went through my mind.
10 or 20 years from now, we'll be trying to address the replacement products to PFAS.
Well, yeah, I just always remember one of the first years I was in the legislature and we were addressing, I don't even remember the name of the chemical, but the stuff that makes you be able to seal cans and jars and things.
Mm.
And that was developed as an alternative to prevent botulism. You know, way back, botulism was killing people.
Yeah.
And that got us past botulism, but it turned out that it was really bad.
Yeah.
And we had to, you know, so, yeah, we don't know about the new stuff, but.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Just to answer your questions a little bit and add, what we heard in testimony is that in terms of human health, ingesting it or getting it on your skin are the known ways that it gets into your body. And so more concerned about things we're eating and what we're eating off of, like black plastic containers that have PFAS and as well as what we're drinking. Those are the places of the understanding that that's the most way we're getting PFAS into our bodies that then can stay in our bodies. In some cases, it passes through us. But that also there's evidence that can get absorbed through your skins, textiles, creams. But all these products, even in the manufacturing process, we're adding it to our environment, our soil, our water, and in some cases of our air, so you can get PFAS, you can also breathe in PFAS. So it's really so prevalent. The reason ultimately for all human health and for environmental health, you need to just stop using the chemical.
Yeah. Anybody have any additional questions before we take a straw poll on this bill? Representative Steady, do you want to, are you going to, do you want to turn your camera on so we can see your hand raised or not? Okay. So all those, this is a straw poll, all those in favor of this bill, what essentially will happen for people new to this process is because this has shared jurisdictional area, the speaker after the report by Representative Chapin will look to House Human Services for what our report is on that. And we didn't take possession of the bill, so we're not going to have a formal vote on it, but this is essentially indicating our support or not for the work of the Environment Committee. So it's a straw poll. Yeah.
Has the committee voted on the bill? No.
No,
Okay.
we're anticipating voting that later on today.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we wanted to get it before they voted on it, because if we had any significant changes that we wanted to
Mhm.
make, we would need to do it via the committee of jurisdiction where the bill is now. So if I could see by a show of hands, all those folks in favor of H 238. Okay, and opposed to H 238. Yeah, Brenda, are you going to indicate your? You can't.
I'm going to abstain because I missed the first part.
Okay, so I guess we'll count you as absent. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your work on furthering our efforts in this area and building on the good work of the House Human Services Committee. With excellent work by the House Environment.
Thank you. Good team. Yeah.
9-1.
Oh, yeah, 9.
I did the
I
same
always-
thing.
It's not 12. There is, because I always include Lori. Thank you. Okay, so folks, just to give you some sense of what's happening, we have another bill that we're going to be looking at after the floor and caucuses, doing a review of, I don't know, some people don't like drive by because they equate that with not violence.
Violent.
Yeah.
Flyover.
Flyover. All right, we're going to be looking at the housing bill that is coming out of House General and Housing. That they actually did a straw poll on that and voted or did a straw poll. I think it was, we'll hear from them, but I think it was favorable 11-0. The reason that we're looking at it is because there are elements of that address homelessness for people, particularly around, we're not going to look at the whole bill. We're going to look at the Vermont Home Improvement Program, the VHIP part. So that will be at 1 o'clock. So you have some time until 4.